So allow me to present today Arjun Banerjee. He is the Deputy Commissioner of Customs with the Government of India, and he is currently ABD in Political Science at the University of Tennessee. Arjun currently holds a Master of Arts in History from the University of Pune in India, and currently he is working on a PhD in political science in which his emphasis tends to be on nuclear security, non-proliferation, disarmament, and export controls. He's currently on sabbatical from his job in New Delhi, India, a position in which he has also taken the mantle up of book review editor of UTK's International Journal of Nuclear Security, and he is currently a scholar practitioner as well. Arjun also enjoys traveling, dogs, the outdoors, photography, good music, and light reading. His speech today is Leader Type in Responses to State-Sponsored Terrorism, specifically in India, in which he is conducting a case study looking at state-sponsored terrorism. Arjun, would you like to take it away?
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, and thanks for having me once again, Stephen, Laura. I'm happy to share the screen now, if that's good. And all right, so as Andrew just mentioned, my topic today to talk about is leader type and responses to state-sponsored terrorism. So right at the outset, I'd be happy to actually tell you what I mean by these terms. So with leader type, I'm actually looking at whether they be prime ministers or presidents of countries and their personalities ranging from some common terms that we hear like hawkish or dovish. So hawkish being more willing to take risks when it comes to conflict, and dovish being less likely and less willing to take risks in conflict or crisis situations. By state-sponsored terrorism, I mean there's two types. So it could be active state-sponsored terrorism or passive state-sponsored terrorism, according to an expert on the field, Daniel Byman. So active is when a terrorist group is provided training, arms, finance, etc. by a certain country. So in international relations, state can refer to a country, and therefore state-sponsored means a country is funding or training a certain terrorist group to hit out at a rival country. And that is more covert. So that basically helps countries maintain a kind of distance while causing harm to their rivals, like secretly, even though it might be open secret, but still it's harder to prove. And that's why this is used very often by countries around the world to attack their rivals. Now, passive state-sponsored terrorism would be instances where the country does not really provide active training, finance, or mission instructions to go and hit another country, but it provides the kind of sanctuary and turns a blind eye, perhaps, to these terrorist groups and they can carry out whatever kind of terrorism they want from these from the soil of that particular country. Now, what I try to do, this topic is part of my PhD dissertation. It's my second chapter out of 3. And in my first chapter, I try to actually get a broader view, perspective around the world, like globally, of 5 different countries and 19 different cases. But here I focus on India alone and the sort of state-sponsored terrorism that affects India, usually suspected to be from our Western neighbor, Pakistan. And so I've got 5 cases for you here and 3 leaders. And what I try to do is evaluate how leader type in the victim state, so basically in this case, India, how leader type influences responses to state-sponsored terrorism. So this is at the leader level, individual level, how decision-making is done in the government to respond to state-sponsored terrorism. My chapter 3 is on Turkey, and it's a similar kind of case study. So moving on, what drove me into actually considering this puzzle was that there's a lot of information in international relations on terrorism and terrorism studies. However, state-sponsored terrorism, which is, if you consider terrorism of the biggest circle, the inner concentric circle, smaller area like a subset would be state-sponsored terrorism. There's not that much information about state-sponsored terrorism per se, and even less the smallest circle, if like the bullseye maybe. So that is actually responses to state-sponsored terrorism. Now, responses have been studied a little bit, but leader type has never been connected to this. So these two literatures is what I'm trying to connect: leader type and responses to state-sponsored terrorism. Now, to the layperson, responses to state-sponsored terrorist attacks, we might think that, okay, if the Soviet Union were to attack the United States today with a kind of state-sponsored terrorism and harms us, the response might be proportional to the severity of the attack. So if 5 cities are badly harmed in the United States, the US, somebody might think that the response will be tit for tat, and maybe the US will get 5 cities or 6 cities in the Soviet Union or Russia today. However, these responses are often counterintuitive, so it doesn't work like that. After that's what caused me to think about the puzzle. That severity of attack, it may seem initially or prima facie to be the best indicator of response. However, that does not seem to be true. Now, before I get into the meat of the matter, I'd like to refresh the map here of South Asia and where exactly these attacks come from. So if you notice, there's a long border with Pakistan on the northwestern part of India and the eastern side of Pakistan. Initially, it used to be attacks only from across the border, the land border. However, in 2008, things changed a lot when our India's economic capital, finance capital, just like New York here, which is Mumbai, if you see on the coastline on the west, several terrorists from Karachi who were apparently trained in Pakistan, it's what is said, they came over in a fishing trawler and attacked Mumbai. So now the maritime coast has also become a potential threat since the Mumbai attacks, which was a big deal in India. So now there's a longer border to take care of, and this is where the attack, the threat matrix is basically on the Western front when it comes to state-sponsored terrorism. Now, what exactly was the puzzle that I had in mind? So 2611 is like in common parlance. So in the Indian style of speaking, we refer to the date first and then the month, the day and then the month. So 2611 or 26 November, which is like our 9/11, happened in Mumbai, India, with the Lashkar-e-Taiba or LET in 2008, launching a simultaneous coordinated attack, like 12 attacks in the same city over a 62-hour gun battle. And it was such a dramatic incident, left a scar on the minds of many. Mumbaikars, as they are called, like New Yorkers, they remain strong, but it was a heavy blow dealt, and something which we all remember, because I've been to some of those landmarks before and after these attacks happened, and there's a big change. You find bullet holes now and other property damage, which is covered by nice like decorations. So it's a personal thing almost for a lot of people. 165 people were killed, including 29 foreigners and several Americans also. Over 300 were wounded. Important landmarks were damaged. And it was perhaps the worst and most dramatic terror attack in post-independence India. India had never seen a terror attack like this before 2008. So this was, I'll get to the definitions later, but this was, in the way that I define it, this was a severe attack. And the response from our leader at that point was a minor response. So that made me, first of all, think like, how does that happen? This was such a major attack. How did we like sit quietly and not really seem to be doing anything about it on the face of it? In contrast, we have a place which nobody had ever heard about before called Uri, India. It's a small little town, garrison, army garrison in the Jammu and Kashmir region, which is pretty troubled, unfortunately. It's like a paradise on earth, they say. And I've seen pictures, it's beautiful, absolutely. But unfortunately, it's a very troubled region. And the JEM, or Jaish-e-Mohammed, a second terrorist group, which is said to be trained in Pakistan again, launched an attack in 2016, so 8 years after the Mumbai attacks. This was a grenade attacks on an Indian Army brigade. While 19 soldiers died, around 24 others injured, 6-hour gun battle. As you can probably notice that the scale was nothing like the kind of scale in Mumbai. I agree that 19 soldiers died, which is in itself very, very unfortunate, but in the scale of things, in the larger scale of things, this seemed to be a much smaller attack. However, so I categorized this as a less severe attack. However, the response was major. Once again, I'm going to define these later in my PPT. So the question then arose in my mind that how come a severe attack has a minor response and a less severe attack has a more major response, which was basically the military, using the military to launch attacks across the border into Pakistani soil. Now, there's been some studies about leaders and responses to SST or state-sponsored terrorism already. First of all, on leader type, we have a few different scholars like Geller, Brown, and Herman, who have actually studied this hawkish and dovish spectrum. So there's study on leader type right here. And while the terms sometimes vary, it's like constrained challengers and constrained respecters, etc. However, we do see that these basically mean the same thing, close to like what is meant by hawkish and dovish decision makers. So more aggressive and tending to be less aggressive in crisis situations. Now, on leaders and its connection to foreign policy decision making, we also have in international relations certain studies done by somebody known as Bueno de Mesquita. So in the classroom, like people love calling them like BDM, him. There's Brule and Mintz. So they talk about all these rational actor decision-making models, etc., and how decisions are made by leaders in a country. Now, on SST responses or state-sponsored terrorism responses, we do have some studies already. So Bialos and Juster, Menon in the Indian context, Bakare and Iqbal, again in the Indian context. They discuss all these varieties of responses that states have made to state-sponsored terrorism from a rival state. So this is about state rivalry again, also as much as it is about terrorism. So all these studies are here, but nothing really connects leader type directly to SST responses. That's where I come up with my theory that leader type may actually have an important role to play in determining SST response by the victim state. So whether a leader is a hawk or a dove, that, among other things, matters. So that's not the only thing I'm saying, but it matters too, and that has been ignored so far in the current literature. And that's where I try to make my contribution in my dissertation. Now, I derive just two simple hypotheses out of that, out of the theory, which is basically that hawkish leaders are more likely than dovish leaders to have major responses to state-sponsored terrorist attacks. So this is normally pretty obvious, like men will be men, it's like that. Hawkish leaders will be more aggressive than dovish leaders. Also, the higher the severity of an SST attack, the greater the likelihood of a major response by the leader of a victim state. So this is my second hypothesis. This concentrates more on the severity of an SST attack and whether or not it relates to responses to SST. So now the hypotheses are non-controversial. I think it's pretty clear and simple, but once again, scholarship has ignored the causality or the connection, the evaluation of the relationship, in other words, between leader type, severity of SST attacks, which could be a trigger, and response to SST. There's a big table that I created. It's got a lot of information. I'll let you look at it for a minute. This is my full list of cases internationally across 5 countries actually, and 12 different leaders, 19 cases. And while leader type and severity of attack are my theories, party orientation, military power, gender, military expenditure in comparison. So these are some of the alternative explanations I've tried to think about before I sort of concluded that leader type is very important decision-making factor. These other alternative explanations did not seem to hold water, or for gender, I don't have enough information. The only female leader I have in my list is Margaret Thatcher. So that's probably not enough of a sample size to really understand whether gender makes any difference. But relative military power, gender, military expenditure, party orientation, these did not seem to make any difference, while leader type clearly did in according to these cases in my studies. Now, focusing on the Indian case study, like zooming in from the global scale to India and Pakistan. So if you see the absolute number, which is 340 instances of state-sponsored terrorist attacks in India between 2001 to 2018. So that's about 19 attacks per year between 2001 and 18. So of course, it's not a one-off attack in Mumbai followed by a 10-year hiatus and then another attack in Uri. It's not that. It's sort of a continuous like rolling process and just happening all the time. And that's why I think it's like an important thing to look into because it can save a lot of lives if it can be stopped in time. So perpetrated by nine different Pakistani sponsored groups that I know are often said to be state-sponsored terrorist groups. So 340, and my source is the Global Terrorism Database, or for short, like GTD. That's how it's called in terrorism terminology. So GTD. And my second figure, it shows that the total number of terrorist incidents in India. So this is all kinds of terrorism. It could be domestic terrorism, something like what happened in Oklahoma City in maybe 1993, if I remember correctly, with the Alfred P. Murrah building being bombed by Timothy McVeigh. So things like that, all kinds of terrorism, and not just state-sponsored, or like a lone wolf terrorist incident, gunmen. Now, the total number here is 9,632 if you consider all terrorist incidents in India in the same period. So while state-sponsored terrorism is only about 3.5% of the total number of terrorist incidents between 2001 and 2018, it's still, if you consider it as an absolute number, it's still a significant number, I feel. And it's not 2, it's not 5, but it's 340. So I wanted to point that out. Now, a few different groups which are often said to be anti-India groups and receiving Pakistani support. Now, what happens is that the state or Pakistan or the country sponsoring any SST group and the terror group, often their ideologies match or their goals or aims match. And that's why they work together in consonance to able to hit out at a common enemy. And that's why states do sponsor terrorism sometimes. And terrorist groups are willing to be sponsored because they often need the training, the weapons, and the wherewithal which the state can provide and without it, it would be hard for them to find maybe funders. Now, 9 groups like Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent, Haqqani Network, Harkatul Mujahideen, Jaish al-Adal, Jaish-e-Mohammed, JKLF, Lashkar-e-Omar, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and SSP. These have been traditionally thorns in the side of India, and most of them, while they receive only sanctuary, some of them receive active training, financing, and through maybe a dark state or a deep state in the Pakistani, within the Pakistani government. So 9 groups listed here. Coming to my research design, this is a qualitative or small n study. I try to use process tracing to actually understand how leaders function, like reverse engineer why they responded in a certain way. And so basically I try to connect different variables and try to find out why leaders respond in a certain way to come up with a certain kind of response to SST attacks. Now the data I use are from interviews of government officials. So I've interviewed the former National Security Advisor of India for this, Shiv Shankar Menon, about the India chapter. I recently interviewed Leon Panetta about 9/11 and archival research also. So I try to use local language texts, which may be helpful, like often sources are not available in English. So Hindi, I can't read Urdu. So about Hindi texts, Bengali text, which is my mother tongue. So all of that to add to my English database. Then I use what I mentioned, GTD was Global Terrorism Database. That's pretty common. So I use data from there. And I also use Stanford's CSAC, or Center for International Security and Cooperation, their Mapping Militants project, which is also kind of useful to find out maybe which state may have sponsored a certain terrorist group, what sort of incident happened. You find that information there as well. Now, I choose 5 cases, 3 leaders in India between the time span of 2000 to 2019. So the first case is in 2000 and the last one is 2019. My independent variable, or the cause, is, I feel, leader type. That's what I claim is my independent variable, leader type, hawkish or dovish. So now we're coming to some definitions here, key definitions, which actually support my arguments. So hawk is peace through strength, but willing to risk conflict if required. Doves, on the other hand, are more risk and violence averse. They would try anything to make compromises, have negotiations, and not get into conflict at all if possible. My dependent variable, or the effect, is SST response, state-sponsored terrorism response, which I dummy out into major or minor. Now, major would be basically overt military strikes. So any military strike that happens and the world media sees it, that's a major response. So everybody knows that this country attacked back. India attacked Pakistan back openly. So that's a major response in my book. And a minor response in my book is anything but that, really. So, which means it could be a military use, but if it's covert and behind the lines enemy operation, quietly going and assassinating someone, that's a minor response in my book. And that also includes diplomatic isolation in international organizations, tit for tat, economic. So tit for tat is like basically using the same, using other state-sponsored terrorist groups from the Indian side to actually harm Pakistan. Economic, maybe sanctions, other financial chokeholds, dialogue, maybe talk it out at a bilateral summit or meeting, trilateral, multilateral, different countries get together and talk about it. and try to stop that from happening. Covert operations, or even no response. So all of that is minor response according to me. So anything overtly military is major, otherwise it's minor. Now, severe attack versus less severe attack. So a severe attack, according to me, is when the casualty is at least 25. Now, this is supported by the GTD, or the Global Terrorism Database. For a terrorist attack, they define any severe attack as casualties being at least 25. Now, the rest of it is what I consider deemed fit. So financial losses, maybe over $1 million, or notable landmarks or seat of government attacked. So it could be any of these, doesn't have to be all for me. So notable landmarks, maybe the Taj Mahal in India is like bombed by a terrorist group. That's a serious matter. Or the Indian parliament is attacked, or the president's estate is attacked. So these would carry a lot of weight, I think. And therefore, I bracket it under severe attack. On the other hand, a less severe attack is where neither are the casualties at least 25, financial losses are less than $1 million, and no notable landmarks attacked. So maybe just a random house collapsed. Maybe it's not that important then. So these are my definitions right here. Now coming to the 3 different leaders and the 5 cases. The first leader I have is Atal Bihari Vajpayee, that's his full name. So Vajpayee, I feel he was a dove because not only from his own statements, if anyone reads his biography or other works by him, he was a prolific writer. And if somebody reads his work, he's always talking about nuclear disarmament, peace first, always giving peace a chance before actually maybe bringing out the hammer. And that he rarely did, really. So he was always trying to end problems through peaceful means. So the first attack is in 2000. Vajpayee served between 1999 to 2004. At this point, Red Fort, which is an important landmark in Indian history in the heart of New Delhi, was attacked in December 2000 by, once again, the Lashkar-e-Taiba, who also are said to have been responsible for the Mumbai 2008 attacks. 3 Indian Army personnel were killed, just 3, but it's a landmark of historic importance. The heart of the city, everybody knows it, it's a big deal. So I bracket it as a pretty severe attack. But the response from Vajpayee was minor. So we see overtures for peace. There were peace talks already on between the Indian side and Pakistani side. So Vajpayee and his then counterpart, Nawaz Sharif, were trying to actually make peace happen, make it a reality. Because since 1947, since the partition happened and both countries gained independence, it's never really been peaceful, at least between the governments. While I have Pakistani friends and personally, but between the governments, it's never been peaceful for some reason. Or, I mean, mild periods of peace, but not really. It could like go any day. So that's always the threat that has been present in every Indian's mind. So overtures for peace from Vajpayee's side. So severe attack, but minor response. This is case 1. Now for my case 2, also Vajpayee. This is a picture of the Indian Parliament with the president's estate at the back. So this is the very next year, within a year, just a few days shy, the Indian Parliament in New Delhi was attacked once again by the LET, the Lashkar-e-Taiba, December 2001. 14 people killed here. So it does not come under my casualties, is less than 25 clearly, but it's a landmark of historic importance again. So Indian Parliament, seat of government, and attacking here is really brave. So minor response, once again by Vajpayee. This time he goes a few steps further. He mobilizes a lot of troops on the Indian side and goes right up to the border of Pakistan. But it's just a troop mobilization. Ultimately, that's what it turns out. It's like a face-off. If you remember, I don't know, Checkpoint Charlie during the Cold War, something like that. It's like a big face-off, but nothing really happens. So it fizzles out, maybe thankfully, but no attack from the Indian side. Okay, so in both cases, Vajpayee, the Dove, seems to have not attacked militarily and overtly either Pakistan or the terrorist group that Pakistan is said to have harbored for these attacks. My next case is one we discussed a little bit at the very beginning, which was the Mumbai 26/11 attacks, or the 9/11 equivalent in India. So Manmohan Singh, the then Prime Minister, seems to have been a dove. So the National Security Advisor from India that I interviewed was the one at the point when this Mumbai attack happened. And so Singh served between 2004 to 2014, so like 2 terms. And as I mentioned earlier, this was a major attack, 165 people killed, over 300 wounded. Several landmarks of historic importance, including places like the Jewish Chabad House in Mumbai, or Chabad House in Mumbai, that was attacked. Several hotels were attacked, train station attacked, and just indiscriminate fire. Cafes were attacked. So all together simultaneously, and it gave Indian security forces a really, really hard time at that time. However, this too turned out to be interestingly a minor response. So Manmohan Singh decided to pressure Pakistan diplomatically through either international organizations, maybe the United Nations or other fora, with other countries mediating, and also bilaterally. So the only steps Manmohan Singh really took, at least overtly, were diplomatic pressures and negotiations and talks, and maybe at best economic sanctions. So nothing serious, no like military response, because the proof apparently, at least on the Indian side, this was the story, that proof like clearly pointed towards Pakistan. And I think it was also corroborated by US intelligence at that point in 2008, that yes, indeed, there was a Pakistani handler controlling the actions of the state-sponsored terrorist group who had come down to India to create this havoc, basically. And all fingers pointed towards Pakistan at that point. However, the response was still minor. Singh kept his cool, and that's what happened. Now, on the other hand, moving to our current Prime Minister in India, Narendra Modi, who I think is a hawk because, first of all his statements are pretty aggressive. He can be aggressive all the time. And also, he has been a right-winger right from the start, his early days. He's been associated with parties which are absolutely like right-wing. And in 2016, so we talked a little bit about this as well at the start for that comparison puzzle thing, which I showed in the beginning. So this was the attack on the army camp near Uri, a place nobody had ever heard of, even in India, except those who live there perhaps. But suddenly Uri was on the map of India, and maybe even the terrorism map on the world stage. So Modi served between 2014 to, and still serves currently. So this attack in 2016 left 19 soldiers dead and around 24 others injured. However, this was neither a major landmark, nor was the financial loss over $1 million. And it's also less than 25 casualties. So this is a less severe attack, according to me. And the response, however, was quite different from what we saw in the last 3 responses. So Modi launched surgical strikes on the Pakistani side of the line of control against what his government claimed were militant launch pads. This is disputed by Pakistan, that they say that no, this is absolutely untrue. And Modi's government, India did not do any such thing. But on the other hand, Modi our government claims that surgical strikes happen. So now surgical strikes are not new in the India-Pakistan scenario. India has apparently carried out many surgical strikes in the past. However, what was novel in this is that the surgical strikes were actually publicized, and there was an effort made to publicize that we have hit back. We have hit Pakistan back. So that was new. So that makes it overt and not covert anymore. So international media now knows that India has hit back. So okay, so this seems to be different from the last three responses, even though it's a less severe attack here. So I'm sure countries and experts on this would sit up and take notice. So this seems different now. Now surgical strikes which are advertised, well, this never happened before. So this was Modi in case one. In case two, I guess consolidating his position as hawk in 2019, when an explosive-laden car rammed into the Central Reserve Police Force paramilitary convoy in Pulwama, Kashmir, on Valentine's Day 2019. What a gift, right? So it left 40 personnel dead and others injured. So this was a severe attack. Now, Modi once again carried out a major response. So the Indian Air Force, for the first time since the India-Pakistan War of 1971, for the first time, the Indian Air Force bombed terrorist camps and launch pads on Pakistani soil in an area called Balakot. Once again, this is disputed by Pakistan, that, oh no, India just bombed a few trees, like knocked over a few trees. That's what India did. So once again, this was overtly publicized, unlike ever before, that the Indian Air Force, and actually there's like videos of jets scrambled and them going out and bombing Pakistan and terrorist camps, launch pads, according to the Indian government, not so according to Pakistan. So anyway, these overt responses is also contributory to Modi's hawkishness. Now, before I proceed, I'd like to say that I don't determine whether a leader is a hawk or a dove after their response or post facto, after they've responded in a certain way. However, I try to determine that from what they were before these attacks happened, before they became leaders, let's say from their biographies, autobiographies, their speeches, and other things they've said or that is available about them. And so it's not post facto, but it's actually before the fact that I try to say that this person is a hawk, and therefore he or she, in this case he, carried out responses accordingly, just like a hawk would. And it's not that the response was hawkish, therefore this person is a hawk or a dove. Now my findings are that leader type does influence the nature of response to state-sponsored terrorism. Again, it's not the only factor I feel influencing the response. It's a very, very complex decision-making process, and therefore it is one of many factors which might influence the kind of response that a country comes up with to state-sponsored terrorism. Now, major attacks do not always lead to major responses. This is my second point. So it's not necessary that a more severe attack will lead to a more severe response, as clearly exemplified by Mumbai in contrast with Uri. Now, out of these cases, 5 out of 5 times, leader responded according to type, regardless of the attack severity. So that's why my suspicion, very strong suspicion, which seems to be corroborated here, is that leader type matters. In conclusion, I'd like to say that leaders perceive the world according to their own tuning. So their worldview is key in driving SST response. For future research, I've got a few plans, if I get the time, and I'd like to extend the study on state-sponsored terrorism to the entire universe of cases. So this was not exactly the universe, but it's only selected cases which are the most important, I feel, or game-changing in some way, and with a variation maintained in my independent variable or the cause, which is leader type, I maintain a variation in that. To and plus these cases are some of the most exemplary and some of the most important ones, which created a lot of media hype in India. So I would like to extend the study on SST to universe of cases to ascertain whether this is true, whether leader type does in fact affect responses to state-sponsored terrorism. I'd also like to do more field work and archival work in local languages. I'd be happy to interview leaders and key personnel in governments. And finally, I would also, being a practitioner myself, I'm trying to get the scholar side up, so scholar practitioner, but being a practitioner, I would like to actually assess the effectiveness of SST responses so that when the time comes, we know exactly how to respond better and accurately. So I would like to do that. So this is my near-term plan for any future research in this subject. And well, thank you so much. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Arjun. So I have a few questions from the audience, if you might be able to answer them for us.
Sure.
So question one is, what type of response has been the most successful to state-sponsored terrorism? I'm guessing that means what has been the most successful at preventing SST from ever occurring in the first place?
That's a great question, first of all. I've not gone into that really, but I would say that at least in the Indian case, neither has been very effective, neither major nor minor. So overt military strikes have not really helped. Diplomatic isolation has not really helped. It's a constant problem which remains in spite of any kind of response. So that's my response at the moment, so yeah, we got to think about that.
All right, thank you. Next question. So you say that party type was not significant. So left or right-leaning party leader was not important in your study, but did you see any differences at all between either people on the left versus the right, or people within the left and people within the right in terms of their response?
Yes, I did see a little bit of difference. So maybe within the right and within the left, a certain leader would tend to, and this is not from these 5 cases again, but it's from my general study across, like, let's say 5 countries and 19 cases. So from there, I do find that there's slight variation that a leader more moderate would probably tend to be a little more aggressive than the one on the absolute left. And the right winger would be even more aggressive. So it's like a spectrum, that's for sure. However, for the sake of easy work, I have categorized them into, for now, into hawkish and dovish. Yes, but there is a spectrum, and the party type does matter.
Okay, thank you. Next question. So for those people who have little historical background of the Indian-Pakistani conflict, what is the nature of the actual conflict between the 2 countries? Where did it stem from? What is the history behind it? And is it religious, or is there something else going on?
Sure. This is again a great question with a lot of historical root, I guess. So this starts with the 2-nation theory that before India got independence, so India was ruled British India, which included Pakistan and maybe a little bit of Afghanistan and many other countries. It was one big entity. And all of this, so in 1947, when India gained independence, there were several factions, several leading political parties. In the Indian side, it was the Indian National Congress, but there was one person who was the founder of Pakistan, especially him, led by him, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who decided that, or who wanted to create a separate state because he felt, or he at least suspected, that Muslims in India would receive secondhand treatment or second-rate treatment. And so he wanted to create a separate country for Muslims. And therefore, he did not budge from his position and decided to create Pakistan. So this is called the 2-nation theory, which Jinnah propounded. And this sort of created that schism, and then which was exacerbated by Jammu and Kashmir, like there's parts of Jammu and Kashmir. Now it could be water resources, it could also be religious factors. The Jammu and Kashmir in 1947, the king was Hindu, but in the Kashmir section of Jammu and Kashmir, the majority population was Muslim. So now Hindu king and Muslim subjects at that point, that created a sort of rift also, and Pakistan tends to hype that up or play that up to be able to get hold of parts of Kashmir. And so it's a very intricate problem out there for sure, and multiple factors. Maybe I don't know whether it's purely religious or it's just the politics behind it, which causes people to fan up these religious differences. So that might be, I suspect that's it, because I've grown up with all sorts of like religious people in my school, high school and stuff. Went to a Protestant school, Roman Catholic college in India, and there were so many Muslims. We are still friends. However, politics is like dangerous sometimes, and we're here to study that. So yes.
Thank you. We have currently one more question at the moment. So why do you think some leaders do not respond to major attacks with severe responses necessarily? And what, generally speaking, is the time frame between an attack and a response? So I presume you would probably like to start with the first part of that question.
Yeah, could you just repeat the first part, Andrew, please?
Yes. So why are major attacks, major terrorist attacks, not always responded to with a major, let's say, military mobilization or major military strike?
Okay, so I think just that's what my dissertation is about, I guess, because leader type matters, and leader type, if there's a dove in power or somebody less prone to starting a conflict or continuing the conflict, and rather will try to look for peaceful solutions. So if there's a dove in power, it's less likely that a country will respond to a major terrorist attack or a severe attack with a major response. But if there's a hawk in power, then you're really asking for it. It seems like, so the hawk will probably respond with a major response to a severe attack. So that's why sometimes it's not a major response to a major attack, which was in the first place surprising to me, and I came up with this dissertation topic in the first place. So, and the second part of your question, I think, so what's the gap in the response time? So when an attack happens, that absolutely depends, so it depends on, that would depend on, I think, the scale of the attack, what kind of attack happened really. For example, some concrete examples. So the Uri attack, the response happened under Modi in 2016, which was a major response. That took about a week to 2 weeks. And then 2 weeks later, one fine morning, a lot of media coverage that, India is hit back, something like that, at least in the Indian media. And then Pakistan starts disputing that. So that's about, let's say, 10 to 14 days. On the other hand, Mumbai attack, which was huge, but the diplomatic isolation, all that took months, I guess, over a long period of time. It was stretched out, so it could vary.
Okay, thank you. I just have one question myself, and that is, do you think the effects of both party and sort of, I guess you could say, foreign policy orientation, whether someone's a dove or a hawk, do you believe party orientation and dovishness versus hawkishness are in some way strongly correlated with one another? And that perhaps you could drop one or the other?
Yeah, great question, Andrew. So yeah, I've thought about it, but sometimes it does not exactly correlate because I've seen leaders, let's say Vajpayee, for example, he was more of the moderate kind, even though he subscribed or led a very right-wing party, the BJP, just like Modi does. But there's I think, a lot of difference between Modi and Vajpayee in terms of their personal characteristics. Vajpayee is still a dove, I feel, rather than a hawk, even though he led the BJP, which is also led by Modi today. And Modi is a hawk. So while there is some correlation, I think it's not a complete overlap. So I decided to keep both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. We have one more question, and that is, how did you find out this information? How did you discover this information about SST? And it seems like SST would kind of be discussed fairly covertly. So how were you able to access this information?
I'm just wondering what this information might exactly mean here. So, any thoughts?
I think the probably the point of the question is if you've got a country that is supporting its state-sponsored terrorism,
yeah,
you would think that on an international sense that they would not want to be very open with the fact that, oh yeah, we've got terrorists that we're helping these people out. So you would think that though, I guess, financing and training would want to be conducted in a way that does not tie the state to the religion. So, and maybe the assumption is, well, I guess this is coming largely from intelligence agencies, but how do we find out, or how do these agencies find out about SST occurring?
Right. So, first of all, I think I get my information from in U.S. And Indian intelligence agencies. First of all, whatever they publish, whatever is open source. For example, there's Patterns of Global Terrorism. That's one website or document produced by the U.S. State Department, which lists terrorist groups and those that are state sponsored. So I get some of the information there. Patterns of Global Terrorism, country reports on terrorism. So you'll find some information there. There's also other scholars who have dug deep into this, including like Daniel Byman. There's Christine Fair from Georgetown. She's done a lot of work in the India-Pakistan area. And so that, as well as CSAC's Mapping Militants project, that also tries to document these things. And so there's multiple sources, I think, that actually point towards state-sponsored terrorism and the strong suspicion that that a particular country is following this course of action. So these are, I think, some of my most important sources, apart from, let's say, the direct conversation with the National Security Advisor and maybe somebody like Leon Panetta. So they may have mentioned in that, okay, this country is like doing this. So then I rely on those too.
Well, so I have a follow-up question to that is, how do you end up in a conversation with Leon Panetta? This is not just some guy that's down the road. Like, this is a big deal.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, it was absolutely an honor. And I mean, I've got connections in Monterey Bay. That's where he's from. He's from Carmel Valley in California. And yeah, I've been on fellowships there, like U.S. government fellowships, and so I knew people who would know him, and then I approached him through those people, and so he's currently heading the Panetta Institute in Carmel and in Monterey actually, and so yeah, I sent him an email with some references, and then I got an email back that Secretary Panetta will meet you at so and so time and so date, and without giving me an option. So I'm like. But I'll take it. So, right. Yeah.
All right. So I believe that covers our questions. Do you have anything else you would like to add, Arjun?
I think I'm good. That's pretty much. I hope you enjoyed the talk, and yeah, if you have any other further questions, I mean, I can leave my email address, or Stephen will have it.
Yeah, well, and I was going to ask, how can people find out more about your work and where you are and stuff you're doing?
So I've got a couple of websites online. So one is the UTK official UTK website. Another one with the International Journal of Nuclear Security. I'm on LinkedIn. So yeah, I think you'll find me there for sure. Otherwise, personally, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Arjun.